Hello and welcome to episode 24 of a Planning Council web series. I'm joined with Ben Kramer as usual. Ben, do you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here as always.
As you see, it's just Ben and myself because we asked some of our contributors to join us, and our contributors this week were, I think, almost exclusively professors. And so they are in the midst of turning in their final grades. I guess that's an important thing that professors do. So it's just Ben and I today, and we're here discussing John 14, verses 8 through 17, and then also possibly the parenthetical verses of 25 through 27, but initially 8 through 17 of John 14. And this is for Pentecost Sunday. So I'm going to go ahead and read John 14, then we'll jump right into a conversation about this. 14, 8 through 17. I'll also read 25 through 27, these parenthetical verses. Philip said to him, which is Jesus, "Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied." Jesus said to him, "Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and you still do not know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe me because of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him because he abides with you, and he will be in you." And then 25 through 27. "I have said these things to you while I am still with you. But the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid." This is the written word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Okay, so interesting passage for Pentecost. John 14. Why on earth would we read John 14 for Pentecost when John's gospel has Jesus giving the Holy Spirit in chapter 20?
Right.
20:22 says Christ breathes the Spirit on them. He says, "Receive the Holy Spirit." We have a story of we have a Pentecostal record in John, but we're not reading it in year C. We're reading 14, the promise of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot going on here. Why would we have this passage? But let's jump right in. There's a lot going on. There's some really important things. So exegeting the text, looking into this, what do you, Ben, where do we start? What do we look at here?
Well, I think to piggyback off of your question, why this text? I think after our ascension text from Luke last Sunday, where there's a tangible absence of Christ in the present, in his flesh, we then move to this text of a promise of the advocate, the Holy Spirit, that will always be present with us. So it's not only solidifying what is present with us after Christ's ascension, but it's also reminding the church of her identity. It's reminding us of the presence of the Holy Spirit, so it is calling us to a specific way of being in the world. And so there's a lot of those nuances there that the preacher will want to pull out. As we discussed last week, the ascension is huge because it's the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy that the human one goes to the right hand of the ancient one and is given dominion over all the universe. And then Christ promises that same sort of authority and power to be granted to us. And so we need to remember that as we're talking about Christ saying, "You will go and do greater things," because he has been given all dominion over the earth, and he sends that power to us. And through that power, we can do greater things than he even perhaps imagined in his earthly ministry. So there's just a lot going on there that I think we would do well to connect to ascension, than to really solidify the promise and identity of the church through these verses.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, especially because in verse 12, Jesus says, "You will do greater works than these because I am going to the Father."
Right.
This is absolutely connected with the ascension. Pentecost and ascension are so intimately connected. We can't have one without the other.
Right. Right.
So looking into the text, just kind of starting at the top, what do you do if you're Philip? What do we do with this? Philip's been following this guy for years now, and he says, okay, all this stuff we've been talking about, just show us the Father, we'll be good to go. All right? Show us the Father, we'll be satisfied. And Jesus' response is, you still don't know me?
Right.
What a blow, right? How do you feel if you're Philip? What do you do if you're Philip? You've given your life to follow this Yeshua.
Right.
Now he says, "Oh, Philip, you don't even know me, do you? How can you say, show us the Father? You don't know me." I mean, that's harsh. What do you do with that?
Yeah, it's like hasn't seen Christ's character through this whole ministry, and it's Jesus not only saying, hey, have you not seen the Father's work through me? Have you not seen that I and the Father are one? Have I not said this from the beginning of my ministry together? But also it's calling Philip to a greater task, rather than looking for himself to be feel safe in his own understanding. He's calling him to be in Jesus. He's calling him to be one with Christ, rather than looking to satisfy his own desires. He's looking for him to be one with Jesus in his ministry. So it's how often have we found ourselves wearing Philip's shoes, just saying, God, just show me, just tell me where to go, where to be, what to do, and then I'll be satisfied. But it doesn't. I don't think the Christian life works that way. It's that we work and function in faithful obedience, and we become aware and know Jesus by our following him. It's not that he needs to prove himself to us. It's that we try to be as close to Jesus as he is to us already.
Right.
So because in Philip's, an underlying theme in Philip's phrase is that the Father is far away.
Right.
Show me the Father, and then we'll be satisfied. Well, it's like, hey, the Father's fingerprints and his actions are right here in front of you, speaking to you.
And have been.
And have been, right. So are you still going to claim that the God is far away from you? He is closer to you than you understand.
And I think we can also connect this to next Sunday as well, to Trinity Sunday. May 22nd is Trinity Sunday. And so we begin to see in this passage that connects back to Ascension. It's the Pentecost passage. It also looks forward to Trinity. I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. The unity of Father and Son, which is incredibly important.
Yeah.
But then there's also this emphasis on belief, a very Johannine concept, right? Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe because of the works themselves. The one who believes in me will also do the works that I do. In fact, will do greater works. And this is a very interesting thing, that this is something that on any given Christian university campus, you'll have this debate all the time. What are these greater works? Students love to wrestle with this question. And I think this is a lot of the church wants to say, how on earth could we do greater works than Christ? What on earth is John talking about? Like, how can Jesus say that? There's no way we can do greater works than Jesus, right? That's absurd, right?
Right. if anyone else said that, it would be heresy.
Right. The only one who could say that is Jesus.
Right.
So this is something that I think will be good to focus on. I'm going to focus on these greater works, but I think it's important. The one who believes in me will do the works that I do. Will do greater works than these. And so we have to look at what are the works that Christ has done. I mean, what he's referencing something specific here. I mean, within his life and his ministry, what are the works of Christ? What do we see him do? And I think what we see Christ do time and time again in his ministry, it's always this ministry of reconciliation.
Yeah.
There's this constant unity. When Jesus performs these miracles, he does so in the name of reconciliation. So at the very beginning of the Gospel of John, the water into wine, this at this wedding feast, this family would have been ridiculed and cast out because they didn't provide enough wine for this wedding feast. So Jesus performs this miracle which prevents this family from social degradation.
Right.
And he saves them from it. And then the hemorrhaging woman who would not have been permitted for 12 years in the presence of the temple is healed so that she can rejoin the community. The lepers that are healed, they're not permitted. They're unclean. The man born blind, who sinned, him or his parents? He's not permitted into the life of the fellowship. And so the works of Christ that we see specifically within this gospel, they're these incredible works of reconciliation. They're these incredible works of unity, of bringing people back to the community, back to the fellowship of faith. So those are the works that Christ is doing. I think we tend to interpret this as the greater works are going to be, we're going to see more people come back from the dead. We're going to see more people with this miraculous healing. But these healings and these signs were done in the name of reconciliation. We're done in the name of bringing people back to community. And so what are the works that we do? Well, maybe it's similar in that we ought to be those who are bringing others back into community, back into the fellowship, the ones who have been ostracized, the ones who are unclean, who are put out. Maybe it's about bringing them in. And we see that happen even in the book of Acts. It's a greater work. The disciples have done a greater work in the book of Acts with there's neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. It's this incredible inclusive act that hasn't been known really ever. And so through the power of the Spirit, they do these greater works. They let more people in than had been let in before.
Yeah.
And then we see what we read from Revelation a few weeks ago, and we talked about Revelation 21 and 22. The gates of the city of the New Jerusalem are open during the day, and there's no night there. So all are welcome. And so there's this theme of perpetual reconciliation. What are the greater works? Maybe these greater works are bringing other people in. Maybe it's greater unity. And that's a good word in a church that is fracturing very much these days, in a church that is being divided over some really silly things.
I think that can play really well into coming from Ascension, where Christ was physically and tangibly present. How oftentimes we can think of Pentecost as the Spirit coming down, coming alongside us and doing that work for us, rather than empowering us to do that greater work. And I think sometimes we can really think that the work of reconciliation is a work of delight and ease, but how difficult it really is. The work of reconciliation, of healing lepers, of healing the woman with the issue of blood, it's all ultimately leading up to Christ's sacrifice on the cross, that he was able to reconcile those things so that sin would not be used as a tool of separation any longer.
Right.
the things that we even call sin, like the leprosy and the issue of blood, those things that we called dividing lines.
Unclean animals in Acts.
Exactly, right. And how Christ's hard work of sacrifice leads to greater works of reconciliation.
Right.
And how we are then called to give that greater sacrifice so that we can be about those greater works. What sort of things are we going to be called to if reconciliation is really our goal?
Mm-hmm.
And how willing are we to be broken for those people who are pushed to the sidelines, and to recognize the dividing lines in our own hearts. I mean, there's so much in the church that we have made an idol in our own perspectives, and kind of putting the responsibility on the Spirit to intercede for us, to go and do that work when Christ has called us to be his body,
Right.
and to be broken with him, and to maybe even shed blood with him, so that we can reconcile. And we screw up a lot. we reconciliation, and it's a hard thing to understand, but reconciliation is not always our primary goal or concern.
Right. We like to be right.
And right, we prefer to be right rather than to reconcile. And I think if that needs to be a check in our hearts, what things are standing or blinding us from the leading of the Holy Spirit, so that we can do that hard sacrifice for that greater work.
Right. Especially in a polarizing political season where do we see does reconciliation trump being right in our life practically? Or do we care more about being right than we do about reconciling with people who might be vastly different from us politically? Right. It seems what we see here is the relationship is more important than being right. But something you intimated, Ben, was the advocate, which we see in verse 16. The Father will give you another advocate, which first, that's an important thing. We talk about the advocate, but Jesus says it's another advocate. There was a first advocate, Christ. Christ is the advocate. And we see that we celebrated that last Sunday with the Ascension Sunday, where now there is a humanly one pleading our case in the heavenly places. Christ is our advocate still. The Father has sent another advocate, the Spirit of truth. And I think when you look into the etymology of the word paraclete, which is translated as advocate in the New Revised, in other places it's comforter. This Greek word paraclete or parakletos it's an interesting word. It's a compound word. Para meaning with or alongside. You think of a paraprofessional. They're a teacher's aide that they work alongside a student. They're a paraprofessional. And then kalis, which means to call. So the paraclete is one who calls alongside. And it had a legal implication at the time. If you needed representation in court, you could call a paraclete, an advocate, one who would speak alongside you. And so I think maybe this is getting into kind of the homiletical handles, different ways we can make this apprehendable to our congregations. One of the things, those who have worked in education, you can talk about a paraprofessional, one who helps the student do the work, who is there alongside the child. And so here we have this advocate, the paraclete, the one who calls alongside. And I think what you were discussing, it's incredibly important. How often do we we give God credit for doing things that's right and good, right? We say, my prayer is that I be a vessel. That's what people will say. Or very often when people will, when they're affirming of a sermon, I'll say, thanks be to God. And I think that's appropriate. But what we see with the advocate is that it's not that the Spirit does it apart from us. It's that the Spirit is working with us to do the great works of reconciliation, of unity, of bringing people to right relationship with God and others. It's not that we are inactive agents in this whole thing. We're not inactive. We are participants. We are active agents in this great work. And it's great because we have one who does it with us, to be with us forever and ever. So the weight is not on our shoulders, but nor are we absent. The advocate will teach you everything and will remind you of all that I have said to you. The paraclete, the one who calls alongside, which is incredibly important. Let's transition, if we can, a little bit, Ben, into how do you preach this? How do you preach on Pentecost Sunday? How can you preach something other than the tongues of fire descending, right? On Pentecost Sunday, how can you preach something other than the tongues? How can you preach John 14, which isn't even the Pentecost passage in John?
Yeah.
How do we preach? What do we do here?
Well, my mind continues to go back to that juxtaposition between presence and absence that we've highlighted in Ascension, where he's promised to not leave them orphaned. He's promised to not abandon them, but to be present with them, just in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. In this sort of hyper spiritual culture that we find ourselves in, there's a tendency to see the presence of the Holy Spirit not as something that is mobilizes or encourages us to move. It's something that we can take for our own therapy, almost, that we feel safe, or we feel affirmed in our own emotions, or in our own state of being, or that our conscience is made affirmed and relaxed. More of a therapeutic
MTD, right?
That, rather than something that really mobilizes us to be different, mobilizes us to be that tangible presence. A commentator said that the presence of Christ took up space in the world. When the Word became flesh, Jesus took up tangible, actual space in the world. And that's what the church is called to do and to be. That this presence of the Holy Spirit that is in and through us, that calls us to this greater work, calls us to take up tangible property in the world,
right?
To take up real estate as the church, to go and be the hands and feet of Jesus, and that we need to be filled with the Holy Spirit is to take up real estate for the kingdom. And how we are called to do that work. We are called to follow the Spirit's leading, to be in the flesh, to do the mission of God in the world. And how in that hyper spiritual culture that can be really downplayed, to kind of make grace really cheap. That I'm the work of reconciliation and forgiveness and all of the things that we seek and yearn for don't really require anything from us. It's the Spirit's work. It's the Spirit's going to do that, and how we are really called to submit ourselves to that work in a very real way, and take up that real estate. And it's hard won, because grace isn't cheap. It's free, but it isn't cheap. And I think that's the direction that preachers would do well to emphasize, that to be called is to abandon ourselves to that work, physically, mentally, and spiritually, not just to have our own inner lives,
and to participate in it.
Yes.
To see ourselves as active agents in the kingdom work.
Right.
And something I think that could be very, very important for us to preach on when we're preaching this text specifically is is that the Spirit hasn't yet been given. This is the promise of the presence of the Spirit. I will send to you the Advocate, and I think we can preach that truth today. Jesus is still promising the presence of the Spirit. This was not a one-time deal.
Right.
The Spirit wasn't given at Pentecost, and then we've never had the Spirit since. The Son is still promising the presence of the Spirit in this world, which I think is an incredibly important word. When you going through in their lives, all the things that they have facing them, the challenges, new parents, death in the family, emotional or mental or physical health issues, to have that promise of one who is with you. God knows the best way to be present with us. How often when we have terrible situations, how often are we sick of people trying to fix them for us when what we know we need is someone to sit with us and to live in pain with us, to share the burden. And here we have the Paraclete. The Father is still sending the Spirit. Jesus is still promising the Advocate, the Paraclete. There will always be this one who is alongside us, celebrating and mourning, and empowering in the midst of all of it.
Because I think that's something that's lost in preaching only, chapters 20 through 21, where we see the Spirit descending. Is that we get back to happening rather than remembering that promise is that the Spirit is something to define our participation in the world, rather than something that just happened one day in the Acts Church.
It wasn't just a one and done thing.
Right. It continues to happen, and this text works really well to emphasize promise and that reality that's still going.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot to preach on. There's so much good stuff in this passage. It's so good to connect this with Ascension Sunday, with what we celebrated last Sunday. And we can be looking forward to Trinity Sunday a week from now. But the Advocate, the Paraclete, has come. We will do greater works than even Christ. If anyone said that by Christ, they'd be labeled a heretic. How good is... Ben, do you have any final word before we close this episode?
I think connecting it at least be through the prayer portion of the service of encouraging the people to their hearts be troubled because of this promise. That it's not just a call to work, which it is, or a hard sacrifice, but it's also that we can take joy and comfort in the fact that this is a tangible promise, and that should fill us with hope in times when we can feel so polarized and disconnected.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, thanks for chatting today.
Yeah, you too, man.
To our viewers, thanks for watching. Great to have you. Comment below if you have any thoughts or any questions. We'd love to hear your feedback. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you again next week. Follow us on Twitter. Check us out on Facebook. And subscribe to our email list. We send out weekly updates with what's going on with a Plain account. And so subscribe. I'll put a link below. You can subscribe just below. Click on that link and we'll let you subscribe there. And we will see you soon. Peace.